Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Lightshare Academy. In this series of videos, we'll talk about fundamentals and different concepts on the art world, more in a instruction kind of vibe. And for this first episode, we thought of making it one of my favorite fundamentals to talk about, perspective. So I'm joined by Dom and Adrian, and we'll just dive straight into it. So first things first, if you want to learn about perspective, I highly recommend using this book here. This is How to Draw by Scott Robertson. On the book, he covers more things like about drawing techniques for perspective, but he also covers what perspective really is. And if you want like a really deep dive into the subject, I highly recommend it. It's something that I've learned a ton with. And yeah.
All right, that's the video.
About the book.
See ya.
Thank you very much. See you next week. No, but
all right. We can
one
jump
thing that
into the core perspectives, right?
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to ask both of you, if I tell you to say in a few words, what do you think perspective is? What would you guys say?
Holy shit! Why you do this, bro?
It's a big question. So broad.
What perspective is? Perspective is a series of lines that define space continuity in a visual way that's interpreted by something like a camera lens, which could be, I'm just trying to make up a lot of fancy words here, which could be
that's fine.
An animal eye, a mechanical camera lens or something, you know. It's a perception of
field,
space, perception of
focal
space.
point or focal length. Camera length as well. Like how far something is like 30 millimeters.
I really like that you guys are mentioning camera lens because it is one of the biggest parts of it. But one thing that really made me understand and truly like visualize what perspective was is that like when you get into art, you see all of that, like, oh, it's vanishing points. Oh, it's construction. Oh, it's like drawing a box and then camera lens and distortion and all of that. And I think people forget to like look at the dictionary when they're starting stuff. And if you ask anyone what is perspective on any other thing, they'll think it's like their point of view. What is your perspective on subject X? What is your perspective on exercise or dieting or whatever?
A point of view, yeah.
Why the hell, when you come to art, we forget about this? It doesn't make any sense, right? And from now on, I want people to, when they think about perspective, think of this. Because all of those other things, these are just like tools. The vanishing points, they are tools for you to draw on a particular perspective. They are tools for you to distort the world and make it like a 2D page fit into your point of view. Before you start thinking about like drawing constructions and doing all of those like crazy ass drawings and using like grids like these and thinking of camera lenses, right? Like think of what's the point of view. And this is the main key concept that I want everyone to take home from this lesson. Like if you every time that you're drawing something, you think of the point of view. I think that it will help you a lot. And then we'll cover like what does, like, okay, this is all fine and simple, but what does it mean, right? And then we come back to the camera lens thing that you guys mentioned, which is the second important part of it. So I brought this graph here, which like talks about camera lenses and how wide their field of view is. And one thing that you need to remember is that as human beings, our point of view is our eye, right? Like this is what you use to see the world, and your eye is a camera, right? Because it's an object in which like the light will come in and it will like record and interpret this light on your brain. Actually, not on your brain because the eye is part of your brain, right? It's kind of like an external part of your brain. Like the more that we study about brain, like the brain neurology thing, the more we realize that like the eye is not just an organ, it's actually part of the brain itself. But to simplify the idea, it's just like, yeah, the eye is your camera. Now, our eye kind of like ends up in this range here. I think it's either 50 or 60 millimeters in terms of like if we're going to adapt it to a lens. But what is good to understand about lenses is the relationship between the number of the lens. So let me flip this. The number of the lens and the field of view, right? The field of view is basically like how wide you can see things. So like if you're thinking of a scene, and I really like this kind of graphs, so I really recommend people to search them up, but it's like the same scene on a lot of different camera lenses, and you can see how much narrower it gets, the field of view, as you advance through them. And that's why we call camera lenses with lower millimeter a wide angle, because this angle here. So everything's extremely obvious when you start looking at the names, right? But it's like the wide angle. Why is it wide angle? Because it's wider than a shallow angle, right? Or a low angle.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So as you're bringing the lens closer to you, you would bring the perspective grid closer to you as well, right? Or you would just leave it.
So here's the thing. I like what you said, because it's exactly that kind of concept that like you said, when you bring your camera closer to you, I don't want like to sound like arrogant or anything, but like when you say bring camera closer to you, like you are the camera. There's no such a thing as bringing the camera closer to you. What you do is you pick where you are looking to the scene from. Because let's say like you are doing a painting, right? And I will bring a couple of examples in a minute. But the way that I think of it, it's the scene already exists, right? I'm not bringing it like me as an observer. I'm not making this with a camera. I'm actually moving myself as the observer in relationship to the scene. And the reason why I think like that is because it allows you to customize what you want to see based on the scene that you want to portray. So as an example, you mentioned bringing it closer would be something like moving from right to left here, right? Like, I'm kind of like fading back the zoom, so it would appear as I'm bringing it closer to myself. But the observer is always on the same spot here. So the only thing that you're doing is actually like seeing things in a much narrower spot.
You're basically cropping,
and because the
image.
resolution here, yeah, exactly. You're basically cropping the image, and because the resolution here is always the same, like it feels like you are feeding more stuff into the same resolution, but you're actually like cropping parts of the image
with a camera. You know, because of the sensor being occupied in its entirety with those pixels.
Yeah, you don't get that feeling.
Yeah, you don't lose any quality. It maintains the quality, which is something that I think doesn't happen with the human eye, because it's not a fair comparison, though they follow similar mechanics. But, you know, because the human eye is like so wide, and you still perceive stuff on the sides, but then you don't zoom in, right? You just focus on...
But yeah, you don't zoom in because you cannot like change the lens that your eyes have, right? Yeah. So that's why you don't zoom in. But you have a particular part of your field of view that is actually deeply in focus. So focus and lens type and lens, what's it called, wideness or whatever, is actually not related, like to that extent. Like, you can have like a focal point on a lens like this, and you can have a focal point on a lens like this. What will change, like when you start to talk about focus, is how much depth you can create based on the type of lens, right? So when you are talking about art, like that's, I think, even like a deeper subject when we talk about perspective, like the depth of field that you can add on each type of lens. But what's really important to understand is that all of these are part of the same thing, right? And that's where you get like the crazy 5-point perspective thing that everyone like loves to talk about, and that people that draw, this is more noticeable when people want to draw, let's say, a super smaller room, right? And they are standing in the corner and they want to draw everything, and they feel like their room inside of like this thing here. And all of a sudden you get like those super distorted shots that look super nice and people draw everything. But what is important to realize that all of those lenses fit into this grid here. The only difference that the lower the millimeter, the wider the lens is, the more of this globe you actually get. So a simple way to think about it is that if we have, let's say, a 14 like we had on that scene on that graph there, or like a 200 millimeter lens, the only thing that changed was the field of view, right? So if we draw like this would be the 14 millimeter lens, this is its field of view, right? So you can use all of this grid here. And then when you go to the 200 millimeter, it's kind of like this.
Yeah, very.
And then at this point,
very small.
It's basically like a 1-point perspective, right? And that's where you start to realize that the tools that we use to draw perspective are actually all being encompassed into the scene here. So let's say that I want to draw something like on a 2-point perspective, right? I just need to like move it here, and then all of a sudden my horizon line's right here, and then I can use all those nice lines that we learn in school to draw a cube inside.
How do you approach the different perspectives, like 1 point, 2 point, 3 point? Is that how you show us that?
Can you draw another little square on a side or something? Because that's, I think, what Dom is asking. Because you'll see how like little you would notice. Yeah, there's almost no, like the same frame. Yeah, there you go. But instead of the center, draw it like on a little side or something, so we can have some more vanishing points. So you see, they're barely like, noticeable.
Yeah, and then like the more you move towards here, right, the more extreme is that angle. And like this area here, it's kind of like the area where you would start to, you see like all these lines that are converging already. Like this would be, a second vanishing point there. And because when we draw, we tend to want to make like straight lines towards vanishing points, what you don't actually get is that like this straight line here is actually part of a gigantic curve that is going towards this area. So like if I pick this part of this line, it looks straight, but it's actually not straight. It's actually a curve that on that, like if my canvas is this, every line will look like it's straight.
Yeah.
Right. If my canvas is like any small piece of this, it will look like straight. And the more that you use a wider lens, the more of this grid that you use, and the more of this grid that you use, the more noticeable those curvature are. And this curvature is basically the world distorting on the face of your camera lens, on the face of your eye, like on the surface of your eye, right?
Right.
And one thing that is cool to notice is that like you don't always need to center it here. You can crop your image like here if you want to. Like that's what we do when you have a horizon line. Yeah, your horizon line above the screen, or your horizon line below the screen. And all of these, like to what Dom said, like how do I apply this? I apply these thinking of the idea of what I want to show. And that's where we get into like the examples, right? I brought here a couple of art pieces from random guys on the internet.
Damn.
I'm not sure if you know these guys, but they kind of, there are a couple of dudes out there. But what I wanted to show here is how like everything is related to what you want to show. So now we know like, okay, perspective is actually point of view, and the point of view will be the determining factor that will pick your lens for you to use, and everything will be surrounded by the objective, like the goal that you want to achieve, right? Here, I assume that Dom wanted to like show how big these things are. So he kind of put us on the like same level as the people, right? So we kind of get their points of view, and the distortion is not like that big because like how far these things are. So the lens that he's kind of using, it's similar to our eye, where we don't get that like extra wide view, right? We don't see a lot of the scene. We just see like this narrow scope of the scene, but we also don't get everything super flattened out, right? Everything's super smashed together. So you see a little bit of distortion, but not much.
Andre,
and then you can actually see how big these characters are.
Could you please take this image and
like
put it on that
3-point perspective?
Hello?
And what?
Can you take this image and put it on the sphere grid so people can understand what you meant when you were saying like the framing thing and what it means? Yeah. I think that's gonna...
Let's see if we can find it.
Yeah, just real quick. Don't need
Yeah. I think that this one, because of like the fact that also like Dom just mentioned, oh, I was doing like a 2-point perspective thing.
Yeah.
It will be like quite small here.
Very small. Yeah.
3 point.
And then like the horizon line is kind of here. Right.
There you go.
And looking up, right? So the points you see, like when he said 3 point, what he actually means is that like these lines are converging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is how we notice that. Yeah. And it's not like a super distorted thing. If we wanted to make this like even more extreme, like you to kind of like do this to the thing,
you just
and then you have to
move it upwards a little bit, and that's it.
Yeah, right? And then you have to like paint over all of these things. Or if you want like a more dramatic thing, you put the center line here, so like they converge towards that direction.
That's a good way to make your pieces feel more, like you're looking up, or
they're towering over you. They're powerful,
exactly,
massive places.
Because you picked your point of view based on what you wanted to show. Like, right, that's the very thing that I want people to notice is that like you are picking your point of view. You're picking where you are looking at the scene from. That's what perspective really means, right? Same deal with Adrian's piece here, right? You want to show this wide landscape here. And then one thing that you do, you kind of like put the horizon line somewhere. It seems to me like high. Along here. Yeah. Because we see like all of this from the top, and you could have like a lower horizon line and we'll still see things from the top. That's like topic for another subject because the ground plane is not always flat. So you can like see things from the top, even if you're looking from below the overall scene. But the idea here was, I assume, to show like, emphasize this distance here that they need to cross somewhere to get to that part, like where there's apparently a structure there. So the reason why you see it from the top, it's kind of like to show the relative size of the characters compared to the overall scene, right? And to be able to show how grandiose everything is, and the characters look smaller and all of that.
Yeah, to focus on the landscape rather than the sky. So,
and because you're using like a landscape, you are using actually like what would be like a less wide lens compared to what Tom did, because everything is a little bit flatter. And you can imagine that if this lens is a extreme zoom, right? You need to be extremely far away, but things need to be gigantic in order for you to use this lens and things still feel big, right? Because look at this building, right? It's a big building, but as soon as you flatten everything out, like, you see the extra small detail. But if the extra small detail then to be super far away to see is still something big, right? That means that's actually like really, really big.
Yeah,
and this is a good way to...
You can tell it's a wide lens because you can still see a lot of difference between the characters, even though they're kind of close to each other in a way. You can still see the difference between the size of them, right? Whereas in a long shot, like one of those high number lenses, you wouldn't see that much of a difference.
Yeah, the characters would be kind of like same sized.
Yeah, which is, by the way, how they get those shots of the giant moon that are not photoshopped, right? That's just a very long lens.
And then like you would see less of this depth, everything will get closer together and all that. And then like I have my own example here just to show like how we do approach this for a concept. Because for a concept, the main thing that you want to communicate is like the design, right? Even though I had like some conversions here, like it's actually what's it called, a higher number lens, right? Because the conversion is not that distorted. And the good thing about it is that you can see and have an idea of the size that things are relative to each other on the design itself.
So this would be a 2 point still.
Yeah, this would be kind of like if I turn on the...
If you put it there, it would be slightly on the left and under the horizon, right?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be kind of like
it can't be a 2 point really. It's always like a 3 point perspective, I guess.
It's always a 5 point perspective. That's the thing, right? It's always.
What if you have
1, 2, 3, 4, 5? It's always like this.
Damn. All right. I thought 3 was already a lot, but now you hit me with this.
But here's the thing. The thing is, you will use this. Like, I really wish people just downloaded this, and each scene that they will do, they just like take the thing there and they kind of like decide where they want their shot to be.
That's a great way to put it.
Now it's a 2-point perspective. Right? Now people would see this and say, it's a 2-point, but it's actually not.
If you have like another object in the scene and it's rotated,
I really like that question.
On there.
So here's the thing. Everything is related to your point of view. And for that reason that you pointed out, I actually made this scene here. So we have a bunch of objects here and they are rotated. Okay. And let me just turn on my overlays here. I have a bunch of cameras just to show the example. So I have like a lower millimeter lens, like it is an 18 millimeters. And then I have the 35, the 50, the 70, and the 200 one. And you can see that even with the rotated one, all of these points here that you would need to plot, they still converge to the same horizon.
Like another point.
It's just another point to the horizon line. So all of those points that we learned, right, like 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, they are all, especially the ones that show depth, right? They're just related to that particular object. So that's why when you see people that start drawing right now and they want to draw like 1 point perspective, all of their like grids, so all of the objects that they put, they're all like just aligned, right? Because they don't understand that in order for you to have a perspective that like makes sense, you don't necessarily need to align them. You can kind of like rotate them, place them in different ways and all of that. They're still making sense, right? And what I want people to notice that how much more distorted you get when you do a different lens. And one thing that I did intentionally here, I put all of them, I made all of these cameras have a similar view of the object in the sense like they're occupying the same size on the screen. But you can see on this viewport how much farther away they need to be in order to capture the same scene.
Hey, one thing that's nice about this is that you actually see kind of simulated, right? But like the size of the cameras, which would be the length of the lenses.
Yeah.
You can see how far they get from the sensor, which is that little point.
This
right
thing
there,
here
that little dot.
is exactly the graph, right? I just made a 3D version of this.
Exactly.
You know, and I really recommend people doing this, like even if just for practice, because then you can actually get examples and think of it like, oh, let's say that I have my plane here. Like this is the ground plane, right? Let me put it below the object. So this is the ground plane. What if I want my plane to actually have a slope, right? How would that show on different camera lenses, right? And you can play around and assemble the scenes. Like I really think that with 3D, studying perspective actually becomes easier. And I don't want people to use this as a crutch, right? Like, so I will not need to study perspective because 3D will give me that. Because it's actually the complete opposite. Like, if you don't know perspective and you use 3D, that's when the mistakes will show up. Because the software will not make mistakes. But when you are painting over it, that's when you will make mistakes. And
another question that's pretty common is like, how would you determine the scale next to the object? If there's a person in the scene, how would you scale appropriately next to things?
I would actually start with the person. So like, let's say that you have a person here. Let's pretend like this cube here is the size of a person, right? Like I'll start by doing the person and then scaling everything back to it in a sense. So let's say that I have a house, right? You know how tall the house usually is. Let's say there's a 2-story one. So like the first one is a little bit above the first person, and then you need to kind of like double that, right? And then you have the ceiling on top of it. So you kind of just.
Do you think that's like intuition to know like these things to study in real life?
I think it's more like studied. So I would bring examples of what you want to build. So let's say that you want to build a car, right? Actually look at photos of cars, like how tall they are next to a person, how wide they are, and make sure that you use that as a reference. If you are doing things that are way too large, let's say like gigantic rocks or anything, and you want a person to be on that scene as well, but have the relative scale be correct. I would try to make sure that you have cues on the image to make sure that like the viewer will be able to relate to that. So again, I'll use your guys' examples here on that particular question, because the only way that we know how big this thing is because of the like not only the characters, but one thing that we did here is like, oh, you put this kind of like portal thing here, right? Arch. And you assume, because you look at like this structure here, that a person, like even if we didn't have the people here, right? Let me erase them. Not sure if this will crash or anything. But let's see that I don't have the person. I just have the cow there. Now, yeah, let's erase it here. Let's erase the cow as well, because there's also a scale cue. Okay.
It's an elephant, bro.
And that was a mech.
Well,
And that was a mech.
okay, and then let's erase the monkey as well.
Okay, whatever it is, I don't care.
Yeah. Now, like you assume that let's erase everything. Let's assume that like because of this art, you kind of assume that a person usually born art is like this size, right?
Yeah.
Or like if it's a very small one, like this one.
You have no reference.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So you need
but
a point of reference.
like this is one of the points of reference, right? At this scene. If I didn't have like one reinforces the other, but even by just having this, you can still think that, oh, that's like damn big, right? Because that's like gigantic compared to this thing here.
Yeah.
And then you could like even exaggerate it a little bit more. Let's say that you want to place a person here. It's like, yeah, let's add the magical fog so that people know when the person joins the scene. Okay. Now we have the play. If you put a person like this size, all of a sudden, like everything is gigantic, right? Like even the arch itself. So
Yeah.
the person will be the cue, but if you don't have any other cues, right? As an example, my piece here, the reason why you kind of know the size of it is because you assume that this will be like either a one person or a 2-person cockpit at most, because that's what most like jets of this
So
size
it's
kinda have.
relative to the subject matter. It's all dependent on
Yeah.
what you're
And then
painting or drawing.
if we don't have any of this, right? Everything is really like that's why concept art is way more about design, right? It's because you are designing the scene to show something as well. Like
But
if
then
you don't
one-
have any of this,
One thing I'd like to add here is like you have to be careful with that depth of field blur and not overdo it, because it might make your scenes appear like mini worlds, you know, like it's a macro shot of a very
yeah,
close up thing that's very small.
yeah. I think we can cover depth of field next, like on another episode, because that's like a very big subject. But the basic idea is more towards here, the harder it will be to create like depth,
Yeah.
because your lens is actually able to focus all of this. And the more
Yeah,
towards here that you are.
You can actually try with your own eye, you know, close one eye, bring your hand closer to you and try to focus on your hand and watch what happens to the background.
Yeah. I think like it's a cool thing, because then like you're landing like in this region here with your eye. So you get all of that capability of actually focusing on one thing versus the other. And then next, I also wanted to recommend people to look at some people's artworks to see how they use perspective. If you want to like check your favorite artist and draw grids on top of what they do, that's cool as well. But some of my favorites like are Chang. The cool thing about his drawings is that like he leaves the perspective lines on, so it makes it really useful for you to study. He does make some other lines which he calls like the action lines of each design. So as an example, like this line here, right, has nothing to do with perspective, but like he has these ones.
They're more like
And-
axis or something.
Yeah, this one is an axis. This one serves both as an axis and as a finishing point, and this one is just the axis. This one, like on the spaceships here, he has the actions of the thrusters, but also you can see like, here's the cool thing. The ship looks gigantic because of how little convergence, how little distortion, how big
we're far
the
from
millimeters of the lens. Yeah. We're not only far, right? But it still looks big and full of detail even being far away. So, like, you can imagine it being close
That's
to
what
it
I mean,
to be
because
like...
if you were closer to the ship, you would need a wider lens.
Yeah. Then, like, same deal here, right? Like, all of these lines. And then, of course, there's the other lines that is traced. Like, you trace the gesture of this beam here, like the supporting structure, the gesture of this one as well. But you can see the vanishing points of everything else here, which is super cool. And then the other two guys are Fang Zoo and the man himself, Scott Robertson. And the good thing about Fang is that he tends to use wider lenses to sketch, so you can really see how much this converges compared to those drawings that you just saw, right?
Yeah, but by the size of those cockpits and stuff, the windows, you can get like an idea of how big these things are. So you can tell that the camera is being placed a lot closer to the subject.
Yeah.
That's why you get that wide view.
And then, like, you get this whole, like, big engine here. And, like, if you were to draw it 100% correct, like, you would probably draw it on the other side too, if this is a symmetrical object, which is also another point for you to kind of like start noticing where you can bend the rules a little bit, because you don't need to be 100% accurate with everything. You can kind of like guesstimate if you get good enough, right? He's not plotting all of the perspective for all of these, right? But he knows that, if I want to really force the wide angle, if this was a little bit like more towards here, I will not see anything over there. So I'll just kill it and emphasize the silhouette. Or just like bring this a little bit closer and then emphasize the silhouette. Right?
And that's the beauty of it, right? Knowing when and how to break the rules.
Yeah. You don't see like the little tip there, because that would kind of like make the silhouette look super weird. And it would not add anything to the design, because that would be the only part that you would be seeing from that other side. So why bother, right? Probably same thing here. This is actually like part of that, right? You don't need to plot everything 100%. You just need to plot like it good enough for you to, well enough for you to be able to draw.
Yeah.
And then on this page from Scott Robertson, the cool thing about this one is that you get the whole thing that we were talking about, like the vanishing points here. So people would call this a 1-point perspective, but you see like how curved this is. Right?
I think placing any of these on that grid you showed earlier is a really great exercise to see how much we comprehend this concept of perspective, right?
Yeah. Let me just do it one drawing, then people can... I would actually recommend people to find like images that they like and try to bring into this thing here. And one thing that you will notice when you do that is that a lot of artists, like even professional artists and all that, we are not too worried about making this extremely perfect. It's just like good enough to sell the idea, right? So as an example, this one, thankfully, he placed the point over there. So we know that that point will land over there, right? It's just a matter of kind of placing the anchor point there and making it small enough until it fits at this. And another thing that you will notice is that the ground plane on this one is a bit angled. So if you really want to like make it fit, you probably need to straighten up.
Like it just has to feel correct, but it doesn't have to be 100%.
Yeah.
Like it has to be believable.
It has to be believable, exactly. And it will stop being believable when you kind of like break things a bit too much, right? So if you have like everything is following everything on the same object, it's kind of like following certain rules, and then you put one part of it that doesn't, right? So you kind of need to make it make sense, and you can kind of make a lot of things work. So as an example, I have a queue of all of the ellipses on this thing, right? They're all like this, and the ellipses are all pointing like there because they're parallel to that line. They're is it not parallel? They are perpendicular to that vanishing point. And then I want to add like a cylinder here, and then I kind of, instead of following the exact same thing, I kind of add it here, right? Now, does this make it wrong? Not necessarily. It just make it have an angle that is different from this one compared to the rest of the drawing. But if I wanted to make it my life easier and have a tank here that's kind of like attached to this roof, right? I would just follow that same angle and makes it a little bit wider and have the ellipse like follow that line. So I'm not saying for people to just make things that are extremely boxy. I'm actually trying to make them think of what is the relative position of everything in relationship to everything else on the scene. And that will inform people of the design that they're making more than any like 1, 2, 3, 4 or whatever vanishing points that you're using. Because the amount of vanishing points is actually infinite, right? If you have a lot of rotating objects and all that. So it's more important to understand the point of view and lens distortion concept than it is to learn exactly how to plot every single point. And just to finish up on this page, another car, while we're using what would be considered wider angle lenses, right? Here, closer to that area. This one's kind of like shallower. So everything is less distorted. You see like the wheel that is close to us is similar sized, whereas here it's like half of the size, right?
And lines are a lot more parallel.
Yeah.
They feel parallel.
Exactly. And then you can start playing, right? Like to what Dom said earlier, this is an object that doesn't line up exactly because all of the vanishing points are pointing towards one direction. And then this is tilted, right? So it's the same thing as taking one of these things here and kind of like rotating it. And now, oh, look, the vanishing point like went away. Actually, it didn't, right? You just rotated that object in space. So
still on the same horizon line. It's just different vanishing point. Cool.
And that's kind of it. Do you guys have anything else that we want to add at the end of the episode?
I think we can continue on another segment later, but hopefully this is like a crash course for you guys watching this on perspective. Thanks, Andre.
Yeah,
thank you very much, guys. And if anyone has any questions, leave them on the comments, and I'll be happy to answer them.
Cool. We'll see you guys in the next one.
See you guys. Bye-bye.